I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and today, at long last, we're driving the Hyundai i30N with the dual clutch automatic gearbox. The Hyundai i30N really reset expectations of what a hot hatch should be when it launched here in Australia about 4 years ago. Now, at the time, Hyundai were talking about doing an automatic version of the i30N down the track, but until now, mid-2021, it's persisted as a manual-only choice, which has been, in one sense, cool, but in another sense has really limited the buying demographic of the i30N to hot hatch cultists who believe that these vehicles are all about changing your own gears. Now, I'm kind of one of those people, but when you look at the success of cars like the Volkswagen Golf GTI in Australia in recent years as an automatic-only hot hatch, it was clear that if Hyundai wanted this vehicle to keep selling well, they needed to add an automatic option. Years in the making, the 8-speed wet clutch, dual clutch automatic in this vehicle actually works really well, as we'll find out when we take the updated i30N out onto the road. And when we do that, we'll also talk about a bunch of other changes that have been made to this hot hatch under the skin, including increased power and torque for the 2-litre turbo engine, and even harder working limited slip differential, and a few tunes they've put into that gearbox to make it as spirited as possible for an auto hot hatch. There's also this new design. It's clearly still an i30N. It continues to wear performance blue paint, but I personally think they've tidied up that front end quite nicely, and it's a fairly handsome vehicle, but you can let me know your thoughts down below the video. We're gonna get started inside the car, but before we do that, make sure to hit subscribe. The 2021 i30N is just a facelift of the existing first generation i30N, the PD i30 chassis sitting beneath this vehicle. So it's no surprise that here inside this hot hatch, the cabin is pretty much the same, but there have been a few changes compared to last year. They mostly relate to infotainment and also these seats, and I'll come to those in just a second. We'll start up here with this new 10.25-inch touchscreen. It's really high resolution, it's got a matte coating so it throws off sun glare really well, but the Apple CarPlay and Android Auto for the system are wired rather than wireless. That's one thing that would have been a slight improvement, but the system itself works really well. No major complaints about it. It's pretty intuitive, and you've also got the ability to customize your performance controls, the dampers, the engine and transmission settings, the limited slip differential settings, exhaust sound, etc., which have now been mapped through this pretty cool kind of spider's web matrix, which probably isn't quite as easy to use as the old customized drive mode settings, but it certainly looks like a pretty cool party piece. Same steering wheel as before, now with paddle shifters, of course. We still have these performance blue highlighted buttons down here for quickly accessing the different drive modes of the vehicle. And of course, paired to these paddle shifters, which look like metal but are just plastic sadly, is this automatic gear shifter. We've seen this before in Hyundai's N-line products, but here we've got the performance blue stripe and stitching. Looks good, looks cool. Now, what also looks cool is these new seats. I'm sitting in the premium tier i30N, but the old electric seats have actually been removed. And in my opinion, that's a good thing, because the i30N's electric seats in the past, they sat quite high, so you never felt like you were really getting down into the car, and that's because the electric motor and mechanism were taking up some vertical space. Now that we're back to manual seats, you do sit further down, and the seats themselves are a really good shape. They're comfortable, they're supportive, the bolsters are tall, and they have illuminated N logos, which is kind of cool, a bit of a BMW M touch there. But, you know, Hyundai give and they take away. And unfortunately, one thing they have taken away is the adjustable thigh extender that you used to get on the i30N front seats, which helped support longer legs. I own a pair of those, so that's one area this car has gone a little backwards. However, the seats are still heated, the steering wheel's heated at this level. I guess that's all part of a bit of a transition to the i30N becoming a little more luxurious and refined. When this car hit the Australian market, you could get one for under 40 grand. Those days are well and truly over. The one I'm sitting in here now is close to 60 grand drive away, but this one has all the trimmings. The auto, all the options, a sunroof, you know, so you're getting a pretty complete car. In terms of quality, it's pretty good. Soft touch most places, only let down by this hideous bit of hard plastic that every PD i30 has. But all in all, it's a pretty nice place to sit and it's well screwed together. Let's check out the back seats. The promise of a 5-door hot hatch is that while you're enjoying the seats up front, you can have extra passengers here in the back, making these vehicles relatively practical. Of course, it's also good gym bag storage. You can also fold these seats down, you know, to put longer items in the back. It's all about making this car the only vehicle that you really need. And on that level, the i30N does perfectly fine. As you can see, I can get myself in here without any trouble. At 6 foot, I've got another inch of headroom under the panoramic sunroof. Legroom behind my own driving position is good, and tow room is just about acceptable, a little bit constricted by the fact these seats do sit a bit lower, which helps you when you're sitting in that particular seat. In terms of amenities back here, it's bare. There's no rear air vents. That's because on the PD i30, if you have a mechanical handbrake, which this car has, that takes up the space where the mechanisms for the rear air vents would be, so we don't have that, but we do have a handbrake for skids. We have quality materials here on the doors, which is extremely rare in the small car segment. We've got a flip down armrest with 2 cup holders. But there are a couple of things back here which are a little unusual. The first one is that even though on the front seats the stitching runs vertically, here on the back seats it runs horizontally. It's actually, I wouldn't be surprised if this was the bench from the pre-facelift car. It just would have been good to complete the detailing to make these replicate the front seats a little bit. And speaking of those front seats, when you're sitting here, whoa, the stitching in the back of the seat is really wavy. No one really cares. It's the kind of thing where on a 6-figure car, you would look for that to be one piece of individual stitching. But hey, my job is to look for small things that aren't quite right. On the whole though, is that the most important thing in an i30N? No. Here around the back of the i30N, the facelift hasn't touched too much here. There is a new design in the running lights back here that looks pleasant enough, but I'm glad that they've kept the triangular third brake light for the hatch. Now, this is clearly the hatch that I've brought along. The fastback version of the i30N was supposed to be killed off for Australia, but it actually is hanging around as kind of like a final limited edition. And then also later on, there'll be a sedan version of the i30N, also with the dual clutch auto for people that prefer a 3-box design, and a Kona N. So exactly the same oily bits as this car, but in the shape of a Kona. But this is the original of the set, the i30N hatch, and that hatchback opens up to reveal a really practical boot. It's a little bigger than before, the floor sits a little bit lower, but as you can see, getting the 3 chasing cars suitcases into the back of the N was no issue. And underneath that boot floor, there actually is a space saver spare for a little bit of confidence for some country touring with this car. And closing the tailgate is nice and easy. Other touches back here, we still have that red detailing from the original i30N and 2 really big tailpipes that, as we'll see when we take this vehicle out for a drive, make a pretty outstanding sound. Running costs for the Hyundai i30N are about par for the course for a hot hatch like this. If you lean on the performance of the car, it's going to use quite a lot of petrol, and in fact its fuel consumption is a little high for this segment. It's thirstier than a Golf GTI or a Focus ST, but it also makes plenty of cool noises, so there is that. In our testing in combined driving, you use around 11 litres per 100 Ks in the i30N, and if you are on a back road exploiting that performance, expect that to look more like 14 or 15. It's not a frugal car per se. Servicing, however, is reasonably affordable on this car. It costs $1,595 over the first 5 years and 50,000 Ks, but keep in mind those service intervals are on the shorter side for this segment. In terms of insurance, over the last 12 months, the median budget direct customer spent $876 to comprehensively insure a new Hyundai i30. Everybody's situation varies. Your premium will vary based on things insurers take into account, like where you live, who drives the car, their driving histories, etc. And the warranty on the i30N is 5 years with unlimited kilometers. So what is the i30N DCT like to drive here on Australian roads for the first time? Well, what mode are we in? Eco? No, we don't want that. Full fat N? No. N custom. All right, let's see what happens. Bit of axle jam. Look, there's only so much a front wheel drive chassis can do, but the i30N dispatches what it can in fact do insanely well. And in fact, with the automatic gearbox, this car is quite different to the original i30N that launched here in Australia. But we'll come back to chassis, ride and handling. First of all, let's talk about the changes to the engine which are modest, but you know, definitely noticeable. So it's still the same 2-litre turbocharged petrol 4-cylinder engine, which Hyundai developed out of an off-the-shelf motor that used to be in cars like the Sonata 2-litre turbo. But it's absolutely a performance tune in the i30N, and especially so now. Power is up to 206 kilowatts, and torque is up substantially, almost 15%, to 392 Newton meters. And it's really that torque which defines the way this engine works, because there's just so much of it in the mid-range. Just pulls like a train uphill. It's always got muscle available. The 2-litre unit has never been a class favourite for a sonorous engine that wants to be revved all the way out. It really does its best work in the low and mid-range. But you absolutely can rev it out if you want to. Take over control with these new paddle shifters. And yeah, it'll chase red line all day while making some pretty fruity sounds. And that's because Hyundai haven't strangled this engine, at least in Australia, with a petrol particulate filter, or really anything, to make those crackles and pops go away. But as you can hear, we also have Golf R style upshift farts from this DCT. So you really get the best of both worlds in terms of the sounds that this exhaust makes, which is cool. Now, speaking of the gearbox, the main event really, it's an 8-speed wet clutch type DCT in development for years, and you can really tell the time has been put into making this a great dual clutch. And that's because it actually avoids some of the low speed refinement issues of other dual clutch gearboxes. Now, that's not a kind of gloved attack at the Golf GTI, because Volkswagen have also managed to improve low speed refinement of their DSG gearboxes in recent years. But the i30N is particularly good at driving up hills without the sort of slippy characteristics of earlier iterations of the DSG. In particular, it's light years better than the dry DSG or dry DCT that you get in an i30 N-line hatch, which sits underneath the N in the i30 range. The shifts are really quick, as you would expect from a DCT. Perhaps the responses aren't quite as rapid as a DSG, but you'd really be splitting seconds literally there. But the logic in the gearbox itself, left to its own devices and not when you're paddle shifting it, is actually really good. It's intuitive, it downshifts progressively. There's actually very rare circumstances that I felt there was even a need to take over on the paddles, really just to make it sound fruitier. And N custom mode continues to be the way to go on Australian roads to really attune this car properly, because you do want the engine and the gearbox in a slightly more aggressive setting than normal, but you want the ride to be at the most comfortable of the 3 damper settings, because it's still properly firm, don't get me wrong. But on our chopped up back roads here in Australia, the comfort ride really does make the most sense. And a lot of Australian kilometres went into the tuning of that suspension. The i30N turns in more enthusiastically now than when it launched, and that's not a change for the facelift car. It's a change that came down the line when the Fastback launched and its suspension settings were applied to the whole range, and you still get the benefit of that here. The i30N is still a heavy car, there's absolutely no avoiding that, particularly compared to a Golf GTI or a GR Yaris, but it manages its weight better than when it first launched. Particularly with the auto, never really having to think about what gear you're in, because that logic internally is so good. The whole symphony comes together more naturally now, and I think the DCT really does play a part in that. It's a better rounded hot hatch for this gearbox, I reckon. It's still noisy, it's a little unrefined. I don't like doing long highway Ks in i30Ns. They don't have much sound deadening, but the safety systems are good and they do make it more relaxing to do big Ks in. In particular, the lane keep system, which you can turn off extremely easily right here on the steering wheel, is actually really well tuned. Plus we've got reversing camera, parking sensors, AEB, adaptive cruise. So So it's a pretty sophisticated little car in that sense. But where it makes so much sense is just attacking back roads at maximum attack, letting the differential work its hardest, getting on the throttle early, quickly. It's not a dainty hot hatch like a Focus ST or a Golf GTI. It's brawny, all in all of the time. That hasn't changed. That persona of the i30N is still there. It's all about the gearbox really, and it's a good auto, it's a good dual clutch. And I think that, you know, it adds a really interesting element to the i30N's pretty broad talents. So those are my opinions of the updated Hyundai i30N with the dual clutch automatic gearbox. Hyundai have done something really special here, and to be honest, I think that actually does mean something coming out of my mouth, because while a whole bunch of other people hailed the arrival of the original i30N as the second coming of Jesus, I was probably a bit more of a doubter at first. But the way that this hatchback has changed over the years with subtle refinements to its suspension to make it ride better and also turn in better, the way the engine has really just been maxed out now in terms of its outputs, and the pretty phenomenal effort that's gone into this 8-speed auto, I'm a bit of a convert, to tell you the truth. I really like it. Of course, there is still the manual for people that want to shift their own gears, and that sort of car won't be around forever. But if you're looking for an auto hot hatch, then this thing, it's got to be on your list. Let me know your thoughts down below this video. While you're there, make sure to hit subscribe and the notification bell. And as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.